All right, guys, as we boot up across the internet to start the stream, today we're going to talk about grooming the revolution right here on All Minus One on the other side of the intro. See you then. All right, welcome everyone. This is All Minus One, and my name is Bill. Thanks for tuning in today for the Siesta stream. And normally I do a hodgepodge kind of thing on the Siesta stream and talk about a lot of news, but today I'm going to talk about CRT Marxism, Neo-Marxism, and the Grooming of the Revolution. Hey, Dahari, good afternoon. So to do that, I am going to take a couple clips, not a ton, but from James Lindsay's work, because I think Lindsay is probably in this cultural battle, this war, the spiritual war, actually, one of the most educated voices out there on the topic. So you all can find what I have cut here over here on this New Discourses podcast on YouTube or elsewhere. And we're going to look at a clip from the very beginning of this, starting off the queer theory is gender, Marxism, etc. It's a very good video explaining how these things are all Marxist. And then I took several clips from this video, from this workshop. Now, James did this as an opening to his new book he just released. And so he did a little series of lectures over the course of a week or something like that, and has been putting them up on YouTube. This is the Proximate Ideological Origins of Critical Race Theory, and this is what I'm going to clip from mostly today. So you guys can watch the whole thing if you would like, if you want the whole context. What I'm going to do, though, of course, as usual, is provide my own commentary. And there's another video which we're going to watch directly from YouTube. I think the very beginning of at least, but we'll get to that. So I hope you guys are ready to endure the next hour or two with me. And if you weren't aware, I am not just streaming on YouTube, I am on DLive. We are live on Rumble right now, and we are live over on Entropy, which is our favorite little free speech platform. And you guys can donate there as well if you want to send super chats. Now, I do read chats. There's no obligation for you guys to do that. But if you want to send something to me to read on air, or you want to, just give me a donation, that's much appreciated. So without further ado, let's get into this first video. Now, this is the longest of the videos that I've clipped. And this is from, again, the Queer Theory is Gender Marxism. It's about 10 minutes, and I will break it up. But you have to understand the full ideology in Marxism. So Lindsay gives about a 10-minute breakdown of how Marxism works, what it is, and we're going to talk about that, and then we'll segue into some other things and talk about this problem of grooming. So let's get started with that.
Quite simple. Marx believed, in essence, or argued at least in essence, in his so-called Communist Confession of Faith, which later got called the Communist Manifesto, that there is a special kind of property in existence. For Marx, it was called capital. What capital does is it's a special kind of property that can produce more property. You can invest your capital and you have more capital. You can put your capital to use and your capital grows. You can use capital to produce more capital. So it's a special kind of property that produces more property. Okay?
So this is the basis of Marxism. Special property gives special privilege, special rights. Okay? Let's continue with this.
So there's this special kind of property that allows people to have access to material wealth, is what that boils down to. You generate wealth through this process. And Marx believed this process was inherently exploitative because somebody owns the capital, keeps other people out of the capital, then has them work as laborers through their capital to produce more capital for themselves. And so the process is actually an exploitative relationship. That exploitative relationship is one where you extract the surplus value from labor and concentrate it yourself and turn it into property that, again, can produce more property, called capital. This creates two kind of fundamental problems or contradictions for Marx. The first of these is that this is not a sustainable process. So this is why you see the incessant focus on sustainability today in the newest Marxist bid for power.
So another important point he's making here, which is why this is the longest clip I have today, guys. The rest of them are about 5 minutes. But the sustainability, the world is, needs to be unified for world peace, the one world government, all that stuff is wrapped up in this idea of sustainability. And what sustainability is a means to which, again, these people can exercise control and power over you, right? It's pretty simple, but it's in the zeitgeist. It is in the mindset of all of Western culture. It is the normative perspective that we have to be sustainable. And mind you, I think that sustainability is very important. But this stuff was given and indoctrinated to me in elementary school in the 80s. So, how much more is it put out there today when we have world leaders who constantly fearmonger and tell us that we have what, 12 years left? That was 4 years ago now, I think. So, uh, we're getting close to that timeline. But it's also telling that being 4 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, when that was being touted, also intersects with the dates given by the UN sustainability plans and the Great Reset. Quite interesting, but all this is it's just emergent.
Ability, as I did in another podcast that you should definitely go listen to and think through, is the tyranny of the 21st century. It is the Marxism of the 21st century. It is resolving the problem of the unlimited growth of capital. It is, in effect, kind of a recreation of the Malthusian argument about population growth growing faster than production capacity, and therefore you're going to have a collapse eventually unless you control and limit and shrink the population, which is a nightmare, which is also part of the current tyranny because of sustainability, because we have unsustainable populations.
Now, that doesn't strike a good chord with me when he says that, but I don't think Lindsay is a Malthusian. I think what he's saying is that we have these populations set up, which we do. It's my big problem with the cities, right? That aren't networked well, not actually self-sustainable. Most of us live this way. I live in the suburbs, but I do at least have some land. I could garden if I needed to, right? There are deer around here. I could hunt if I needed to. There are farmers markets. There are local farms. I can get access to things if I needed to. People in the cities, though, they are completely cut off. I talked about this some time ago. What was it? Last year, I was in DC with my wife. She was doing a business thing. And I was just thinking about how congested and clustered it was as we were driving through the area. And then I was looking on a map. I was talking about it, of how it's just all built up for miles. We're talking like 40 miles of just dense urban population. And that, my friends, is certainly not sustainable. Yet it is what the UN wishes to do to the entire world. It wishes to put everyone in those cities, or at least that's all that they seem to care about or focus on in their writings and sustainability.
But in this case, it's that capital itself is going to become, the capital itself can't continue to grow forever. And so there's an inherent contradiction between the idea of a piece of property, capital, that can produce more property, but that can't go on forever. And that creates this kind of contradiction that Marx tries to resolve dialectically by saying that capital itself is inherently contradictory. We're getting off of the simple target, though, so I don't want to.
So again, just to point out what he's saying here, the Marxist view of thinking, Marx himself understood that his beliefs were contradictory. So what he uses to resolve that is Hegel's dialectic and creates a synthesis. And that's what we are living in. We are living in the synthetic society.
Go deeper into that. The second big contradiction is that there is a contradiction, as I've already explained, for Marx. And this is the key contradiction of Marxism, or that Marxism fixates on. The contradiction is between the means of production and the forces of production. So capital produces the means of production, but the forces of production are the laborers who use the capital to have their surplus value stolen from them and then be alienated from the process of their own work, etc. So all I really need you to understand is that for Marx, there's a special kind of private property called capital. The existence of private property enables capital. If you have your own property and can do whatever you want with it, you can also turn it into capital. In other words, property that you risk in order to try to obtain more capital.
And because you have capital, which he'll explain, that makes you privileged. That makes you part of the bourgeois. And again, you can immediately think of how we use those words today with things like CRT.
For more property. Or in the words of Goldman Sachs, you can take your pile of money and try to turn it into a bigger pile of money if you want. Okay, so for Marxism, back to the nutshell, there's a special kind of property. For him, it's called capital. Certain people have access to this special kind of property. Then they justify why they get access to this special kind of property and why other people don't. Why does the laborer that's being exploited not have his own capital? Well, he didn't work as hard. He didn't take the risk. He didn't invest in it. And this broad ideology in service of justifying the special kind of property is called an ideology. It's called capitalism in this case. So you create a big mythology that justifies why you get to have access to the special property and other people don't.
So again, he is saying they are privileged, they have a special kind of property, they have special access, and that the masses are brainwashed to believe this thing. And as they are brainwashed to believe it, they accept it. And the Marxist is a liberator trying to provide them with some sort of Gnostic system of faith that then liberates these people's minds and allows them to set on the course of history as Marx determined it. And we'll talk about the flaws of Marxism a little bit as we go through this. And of course, how the neo-Marxist understood that, because as Ignatius just put up here, Marx was not very bright. He was kind of an idiot. Now, he was touted as being some genius, but I don't really know why or understand why. The man died penniless. He had a very strained relation with his family, so his moral character was quite off. He hated God. He wrote poems about it. He basically never did anything. Now, he was a Civil War correspondent during the American Civil War. He kind of wrote here and there for papers, but a lot of his writings, a lot of people believe Engels actually did. And we know that there were periods of time where he got money. I've read on here before, large sums of money, like 30 grand. We're talking about back in the day, Marx's day in the 1800s. That's a lot of money. And he proceeds, instead of giving the money to his family, to his wife and his children who were starving and freezing to death, and actually had people come in and take away their furniture. Well, Marx decided instead to get drunk and party it up. His children, many, I don't recall off the top of my head. I think he had 4 kids. I think 2 of them, I don't quote me on this, but some of them did not make it to adulthood. The ones that did, I think it was 2 of them, made it to adulthood. Both killed themselves, if I'm not mistaken. Marx also had an illegitimate son with his maid, so that he treated like a servant his entire life. He never treated him as his son. So this is not a person who is of good moral character. Intellectually, he was found to be wrong immediately. It's why neo-Marxism came about. It's why Trotskyism and Stalinism and Leninism came about, because Marx didn't have it right. Stalin and Lenin understood that they needed to, as the bourgeois themselves, they needed to fire up the working class for the Russian Revolution to work, because it never would happen otherwise, because, well, this capitalistic project has everyone brainwashed.
Now, this is what sets up the dynamic, the structure of the social relations in society. So now you have an upper class of people, the capitalists, who put out, or the bourgeoisie actually, who put out a ideology called capitalism that justifies why they have access to special property called capital that nobody else gets to have, and that why that the ideology also explains why the people on the bottom, the infrastructure of society or the base of society, are going to be in the position they are so they're in the productive capacity, whereas the capitalists control the means. And so there's an inherent contradiction between the means and production of society. So this is Marxism in a nutshell. There's a special kind of property. There's an upper class that has access to it. There's a lower class that is excluded from it. The upper class organizes society in what Marx called a superstructural way. The lower class, or the base, that does all the productive work with their hammer and their sickle, is known as the infrastructure. These are put into a dynamic relationship that is mediated by the mythology created by the people in the superstructure, which is meant to justify why they get to have access to capital, why the others don't, why they get to keep having access to capital. But it's also a mythology, so it's like a religion. It's a fake story they tell themselves, and that they believe, and because they believe it, they don't even realize that it's fake.
And you could say, people could make the same claim about any religious faith. That goes, of course, to whatever proofs the person has of their faith for you. But the problem with this faith is it doesn't do anything but destroy and devour. The problem with the Marxist faith is that it is completely self-devouring. It cannibalizes itself all the time, and we will get to that. We will talk about that here in a little bit. But the belief system of this is a circular logic that essentially encapsulates itself, because if you believe in the free market and those things, and having capital that you can then continue to invest and expand your wealth, then you're brainwashed by society and the bourgeois and this system. See, it always goes back to that. And you are brainwashed because, well, you have the capital and this privilege. And because you have this privilege, you cannot see the underclass that are not privileged and how they can't come up, right? That's what this is about.
And so what you have then is that the infrastructure being embedded in this unfair, exploitative, and alienating structure can become awakened to the true nature of the ideology, and thus can either inform people in that upper class of what they're actually doing beyond their ability to see it because they're willfully ignorant of it, or if they become awakened, they can just amass together in solidarity and create the necessary conditions, a large enough workers' movement to overthrow the system and take control of the means of production for themselves. So, again, let me just back up and say it very simple. There's a special kind of property called capital. The bourgeoisie has given themselves access to it. They've created an ideology called capitalism that justifies why they get it and other people don't. This sets up a structure of society. That structure of society is determinant on how you are. If you're in the bourgeoisie, you think in terms of why you deserve to be there. If you're in the proletariat, actually the working class, you are brainwashed into believing that's you belong there. That's why he calls religion the sigh of the oppressed people and the opium of the masses, is because the masses are given the ideology and taught to believe, to accept kind of fatalistically their lot in life. The working class can then be awakened to the nature of this class antagonism by having it revealed to them. Once that's revealed to them, they can engage in a revolutionary class struggle.
Once it's revealed to them, they become allies.
And eventually seize the means of production, establish a workers' state, which enshrines the Marxist ideology. That's called socialism for Marx, where all of the means of production are controlled by the party, and the products are redistributed more equitably throughout society. And in the long run, this becomes spontaneous and becomes communism. That's Marxism in a nutshell. Key pieces: special kind of property, upper class has access, lower class is excluded. That creates a dialectical dynamic that structures all of society. Who you are, what you can think, and your character are determined by your position in that structure. and how it shapes your thought. That's called material determinism in Marxism. And the goal of Marxism is to awaken a consciousness that brings you aware of the class antagonism and the so-called true nature of material reality as such. Okay, so it's a 10-minute summary of Marxism.
All right. So it's a pretty in-depth, actually, summary, but it is a 10-minute summary, and you can find that on that video I showed you of queer theory is gender Marxism. CRT is race Marxism. Uh, the body positive movement is fat Marxism. The CRT originally was legal Marxism. The postmodernists are language Marxist. And so down the road it goes, infiltrating every aspect of society, right? You guys identify as a threat. F around and find out. Yeah. Yeah. And so I just wanted to play that to kind of get your mind prepped into how these people think and understand what you are dealing with when you're talking to a Marxist, because 9 times out of 10, regardless if they think they're a Marxist or not, you're talking to a Marxist if you're on the other side of an issue, right? If you're here, if you're a liberty-minded individual, if you believe in, the basic human rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of property or happiness, however you wish to frame that, if you wish to, have your own manifest destiny, your own will to live your life the way you'd like to, well, you're going to have a problem with all those Marxists out there, because they think that there is only one singular way to live, and it is their way. And their faith tells them that anyone who stands in their way, they can destroy. So with that, we're going to play this clip right here. And this is about basically how Marxists are allowed to have a double standard, because in their mindset, they are the oppressed ones. This is called repressive tolerance. So again, I'm doing this so you guys, if you're not aware of these things, you can be more educated about it. You can understand, and you can combat these folks more efficiently by understanding them. You always need to know your enemy, who they are, how they think, and what weaknesses they have. What are the kinks in their armor?
Marcuse in 1965, though, writes an essay that is absolutely crucial to understanding the world that we live in. That's repressive tolerance.
By the way, this is from the Proximate Ideological Origins of Critical Race Theory video that I showed you earlier, just so you know where you can go watch the whole thing. This is a shorter clip. Guys, I don't think I have anything more than 5 minutes after this, or after that original one.
People who follow me will have listened to my 4-part podcast where I read through repressive tolerance in full and tried to explain it on the New Discourses podcast. If you haven't done that, you should check that out. It's a horrifying essay. We live in the logic of repressive tolerance. The thesis of repressive tolerance, this is, we're talking what I would call the second generation of critical theory, the first generation being this very theoretical thing from Horkheimer, the second generation being Marcuse's very activist, very driven mentality. The thesis statement of that is that movements from the left must be tolerated, extended tolerance, even when they are violent. Movements from the right must not be extended tolerance, even to the point of censoring, and as he says, pre-censoring them, so that the thought that might preserve the status quo cannot even enter the mind.
How Orwellian, right? And Orwell was writing about the Soviet Union. You'll hear tankies today state he was not, but that is 100%. And they'll say, well, no, Animal Farm was, but not 1984. Oh no, it absolutely was. And Orwell was writing in a way predictively of how society would be. I mean, look at the UK now with their CCTVs, the closed circuit television cameras all over the place. And I get it. The UK during the 90s especially was a really, really rough place. Tank was asking me on the Unjustified the Memes about slapping somebody, because we were talking about, the whole Will Smith thing. And I said, well, actually, slap's a very good self-defense tool. If you know how to do it right. I mean, I guarantee you I can knock you out with a slap. And it saves your hands. It's a lot easier to jam your thumb or bust your knuckle throwing a punch than if I smack you with my hand. And it's also very efficient at grabbing. And I was telling him, you should check out someone like Lee Morrison or Jeff Thompson, guys back in the day who were bouncers in the UK when people got stabbed a lot. And I believe Lee Morrison himself had been stabbed several times, had been in at least 6 knife encounters. Their stuff's very brutal, though. It's very upfront. It's very direct because that's the atmosphere at the time. It had to be in order to survive, in order to keep the peace. So that played into itself, and then you get this giant police state by the early 2000s, and it's quite crazy, but it's how it has gone. In any case, let's get back to the video.
He even admittedly says this is censorship, even pre-censorship to be sure, and then he qualifies it with something like the existing media and social situation already censor left-wing thought, so it's fine. They get to retaliate. So we must tolerate everything from the left, including violence. We must not tolerate anything from the right. If you can't connect that to the last year of your life, I don't know how to help you. We had literal riots. We suspended a pandemic for riots, looting, and arson. We had the now Vice President of the United States publish and promote a bail them out of jail fund. We had corrupt district attorneys around the country in our cities refusing to prosecute radical uprisings from the left. Meanwhile, Hunter Biden's laptop story, which was true, was completely stricken from social media. You don't want them to even be able to form the thought. Parler was nuked from orbit because right-wing people happened to be there. Apparently what happened on January 6th, which mostly seemed to involve people walking around and parading indoors inside the Capitol after being let in, although there was obviously some rioting and violence outside, was the worst thing that's happened since the Civil War, or apparently since like a meteor struck and killed the dinosaurs or something, whatever the word of the day happens to be. So you get this impression that there's a little bit of a tilted playing field. Of course, what they're saying is that they're leveling the playing field because they believe themselves the permanent excluded underdog. This is core to their theory. They believe that left-wing radical thought is viciously suppressed by a society that doesn't want it because we don't. And therefore, the playing field is not level. It's not that they're wrong, it's that they're being suppressed. So we have to level the playing field by suppressing all right-wing everything to the point where you're not even allowed to hear the story. I got struck down on Facebook for sharing a 20-second clip of Anthony Fauci 1 year earlier saying, "Don't wear masks." The only commentary I added to that was Anthony Fauci 1 year ago, but I was spreading misinformation, even though I made a factual statement about that clip from like 60 Minutes or whatever it was. You get the impression that certain things are being repressed in the name of tolerance, whereas other things are being permitted in the name of tolerance and justice. We live in repressive tolerance.
And you really need to consider that because we do live in repressive tolerance. It's what's going on in the world today, guys. And so, this is the idea, again, getting back to the idea of Orwell, that war is peace, freedom is slavery. And, oh crap, I can't even remember the third one now. But regardless, you guys know the lines, right? War is peace, freedom is slavery. I can't think of what the third one is. But the thing is that it doesn't matter what the truth is. And this actually gets into postmodernism, we'll talk about here in a bit. But it matters that we are going in the right historical direction. We are on the right side of history, bringing about the utopia and the shedding of all responsibility, the libertine, which is what all this is about, guys. This is libertinism. I'm beginning to believe, very much so, that the false prophet of the book of Revelations is actually Karl Marx. Now, I could be wrong. It's secular humanism is the problem that we are facing. This happened during the Enlightenment. People began to lose their faith in God. For a long time in history, in recent history, I should say, in the 20th century, the 19th and the 20th century, actually, because we didn't find certain archaeological findings that were, supposed to be biblical historical events, they would deny that those things ever existed, which is absurd because to find something from thousands of years ago is like rare. I mean, let's just be honest, guys. Things fade away. That's part of the whole thing of entropy, right? Where everything's fading away, everything is dying in this universe. But they would deny these things, and then you would get people like, let's say, Leo Tolstoy, who writes a book called Confession. Now, in the Confession, he's talking about how he came to Christianity himself, but he was a 19th century intellectual and a obviously one of the greatest writers ever. Very insightful man, and he was a snob about the things that he knew, and he was enlightened, and yet he wanted to die. He was so nihilistic. He wanted to kill himself every single day. It's a very powerful read, his Confession. And he didn't have the courage to do it. And finally, he started to relate to regular people, the working class, the average everyday Joe. And what he found in that was their basic, I just want to work to get by, I want to provide for my family, and I believe and follow God. And I mean, and within that, I mean to be a force of good in this world and do things good for other people. And it changed his life. It literally changed his life. But see, Tolstoy before that was part of the bourgeois. He wasn't maybe the richest of the rich, but he was quite well off, right? He was an artist and a writer, right? And as the bourgeois, as the lower level, at least, of them, he was like everyone we have today in the upper middle class who is a Marxist, because that's what this is. This is a modern phenomenon of people who have lost their connection to God, or they hate God. They feel disenfranchised. They're rich, but they're not as rich as other people. Therefore, they envy them, and they must make those people suffer because they're not as good as them, right? That's what this is about. So we're going to keep going with some more Lindsay stuff, and you're going to hear how he explains this. He's going to talk a little bit more about Marcuse here, I believe. And you're going to hear about how that this stuff actually encourages psychopathy. Something I say all the time because it's blatantly obvious. I run off intuition, guys, 90% of the time, right? I have read a lot in my life. I've read a lot of stuff. I'm pretty well versed with the first principles, all these things, but I am not a scholar on this, which is why I defer to Lindsay. But via intuition, I've found that everything I have known and figured out is 100% correct.
69, Marcuse has managed to become crazier. I don't know if he discovered LSD or something. I mean, Marcuse worked originally, if you don't know this, for the OSS, which preceded the CIA. When he came over from Germany and was given asylum, he was put in charge of, or put on the inside of the organization that was going to become the CIA. In case you wonder what's going on with that organization. Where did that come from? So by 1969, he's crazier. He writes this essay, an essay on liberal.
All right, guys. So, sorry to step away there for a second. So, Marcuse was in the CIA. Quite interesting. You should take note of that, mental note, because the CIA, as well as the FBI, but specifically the spook agencies, the CIA, the NSA, all the ones you don't know about that are there. There are plenty of spy organizations in the U.S., plenty of little police secret service type bureaucracies, whatever you want to call them, like what is it, the DDS, the diplomatic, or is it diplomatic, is it DSS, diplomatic security service, stuff like that, or the air marshals, right? Like, we know about them because of 9/11, but most people didn't know about them before that. In any case, they have been very much a part of this Marxist push for a long time as well. I'm not saying Marcuse influenced them. I'm not saying he was influenced while he was in the CIA. I'm just saying that this is at least tied in some manner or another, because recall how this works. You're dealing in data, you're dealing in information as a spy agency. And so when you have certain pieces of information, that gives you power and leverage over some people. We call this blackmail, of course, but that is 100% what happens. It's how it works. We all know the stories of Herbert Hoover, or at least you should, and his files on people. Of course, Hoover was supposedly like to dress up as a woman as well, so they had dirt on him. But this is how information is processed in DC. And I talked about this, I don't know when the stream was. Was it my Tuesday stream? Was it last Sunday? I don't remember. I think it might have been last Sunday. I was talking about oh, now his name escapes me. The congressman in the wheelchair. Someone remind me of his name. Madison Cawthorn. And how he was on John Lovell's Warrior Poet Society, talking about how he had been invited to orgies and snorting cocaine. And seen people snort cocaine in front of him, who also are passing drug bills to put you in jail. He talked about how that these people try to get dirt on other people to hold it over their heads. This is how the system works, folks. It's utterly corrupt through and through, and it's always going to be corrupt through and through, because this is just how, this is the nature of humanity. And in a human society that is just completely atomized right now, has no understanding of anything spiritual or deep, you don't think this is going to get better, do you? It's not. It's going downhill faster and faster. It is going to accelerate very soon. And, you know, we can talk about the economy and all those other things, but it's not the economy that's going to be the biggest problem. I know you need to get gas and food and work and all that kind of stuff. But if they're coming to your home and taking you, if they're coming to your children and taking them in this grooming of the revolution, right? It's going to be far worse than inflation. And we can talk about Red China and what went down there. In fact, Lindsay's going to reference some of that. I don't know if it's going to be in the clips I have. I don't recall. Mind you guys, I've watched all this before, but I had to watch it all again to clip it and get it correct. So I know he talks about it, but it also, I've watched like 3 different hour, some odd long James Lindsay videos in the last day, so I could be confused. But this is the real problem, because it's not just if you can buy or sell. It's not just the participation in society. It's the coming after you and the stripping away of your children, all in the name of the revolution.
Liberation is the new name for communism. We're not doing vulgar Marxism anymore. Communism didn't work. Khrushchev had spoken. Khrushchev had told about what Stalin had done. Khrushchev being now, at that time in the 50s, in charge of Russia, or the Soviet Union. There was no denying this. There was no, oh, this is communist propaganda. No, he had come out and confessed to Stalin's crimes. And there's no denying it. The failure in the Soviet Union of communism, the failure in the Eastern Bloc, the failure through other parts of Eastern Europe were undeniable. So Marcuse in Essay on Liberation begins by praising the revolution in China. It's going well. That's what he says. 1969 is in the middle of the Cultural Revolution, which was 66 through 76. Tens of millions of people were dying under Mao's Cultural Revolution. Children were being indoctrinated in their schools to attack their teachers and parents and grandparents. It was going well, is what Marcuse says right from the beginning. The revolution there is going well. The revolution in Vietnam is going well. The revolution in Cuba would be going well, except that it has too much Soviet influence and something went wrong there. But we should look to people like Castro and Che anyway, because they have the right idea. Liberation movements are happening all around the world, and there's a sexual liberation movement on, there's a black liberation movement on that had started in the 50s. And Marcuse is now taking all of this liberation energy and he's trying to co-opt it within the neo-Marxist program. Of course, what was the goal of Marx? Was to liberate from capitalism. So liberation has always been a communist plan. Liberation sounds good. It isn't.
And part of that liberation, like I said, folks, this isn't real liberation. This is libertinism. This is the root of all of this. These people don't want responsibility. They want to live like they are rulers and kings, and so they've concocted or they believe in this whole system, which they think is going to prop them up to this position, while most of them are just going to get the wall. But it's liberation from reality. And this is the things that are coming, right, with the metaverse. This is the things that are coming with what's the chip that Elon Musk is working on that implants in your brain. This is the kind of thing that they are seeking because they don't want to have any restrictions or rules on them. They are in this belief that all of those things are repressive. Again, it's do what thou willst. To restrain yourself is repressive to them.
It's liberation from the
Neuralink. I just remembered now. Neuralink. That's what I was talking about.
system, liberation from capitalism, liberation from being happy. And so Marcuse writes this insane essay, the first section of which, or chapter of which, again, it's one of those things. Is it a book? Is it an essay? Is titled A Biological Foundation for Socialism, as a question. And his argument is that, like this has never been tried before, that we must change human nature to make it acceptable to liberation, to socialism. In fact, he defines liberation in that essay as socialism without the bureaucracies, because it'll work this time. Socialism without the bureaucracies. And to get there, we have to change man by introjecting a new morality into him, by creating a new moral paradigm in which he has to live until at the level of his biological needs, he needs liberation and socialism from the existing oppressive system. In other words, we're going to awaken a critical consciousness in him until he can't stand living in the society that he's living in, to the point where it's at his level of needs, he can't function. In other words, and I think this is as good a confession as you can find, critical theory exists to induce psychopathologies, which are by definition psychological states that make you incapable of dealing with reality as it is, to the point where they impact your ability to live your daily life.
Yeah, that's what critical race theory is all about. It's about inducing psychopathologies onto the population so it self-devours. And it is the new morality and the liberation of the old morality. And again, we'll get more into the special type of power or capital or whatever. You have a special type of privilege that's called being white, right? And everyone who's not white is oppressed. That's what CRT is in a nutshell. But again, this is deeper than just some ideas that have just been sitting on the surface or some people are putting out there around. They need to create a new morality, which is instilled first in your children. They are grooming the revolution. All right. I just want to make sure I have, okay. So here he's going to talk about the long cultural institutional march and how this came about. We're going to talk about the new left a little bit here, and we'll get more specifically into grooming as we go here.
Cultural Marxism becomes relevant because Antonio Gramsci had his plan that he talked about in the prison notebooks. It's not clear what influence he had on certain other characters like Mao Zedong, but the statement that is pretty solid throughout literature on this, scholarly literature on this, is that Mao did what Gramsci thought. Mao maybe would have had access to Gramsci. Gramsci was popular in the 40s and early 50s in China, but then was banned and didn't reemerge until the 80s. So it's not clear what Mao had read and what Mao had not. Moscow had it by 37, so it's possible, not known. But what Mao did in his Cultural Revolution is what people like Herbert Marcuse and Rudi Dutschke looked at and saw as something that works, this Cultural Revolution that they then renamed the Long March Through the Institutions.
Now, you've probably heard that phrase before, the long march of the institutions. What Marxists like to do is they like to come up with these little catchphrases. Generally, when I talk to people who are indoctrinated like this, I just tell them flat out, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know your own ideology. I understand it better than you. I understand, as I told someone on Twitter the other day, the first principles of servitude, and that they are just sloganeers. That's all that they are. The majority of them, the useless, useful idiots, I guess. They are just sloganeers. They don't believe in anything. It's all persona. It's all surface level, and of course, it goes back to the emotional appeal. And if you basically take someone and you say, well, for me, I'm a short guy. It'd be nice to be taller. So if you take someone and say, I can promise you, you'll be taller if you do this, this, and that, that might be tempting to me, right? And because it appeals to my emotions. It appeals, it'd be nice to be a little bit taller. I would, people look at you differently when you're taller. You have a different perspective. I remember I was at work. One of my favorite guys to work with, actually, big old 6'5" dude, or maybe it might have been 6'6". Ted, great guy, very smart, redneck as hell, but one of the smartest guys I ever met in my life. Love that guy to death. And I didn't know him before I started night shifts. Just see him come in and all, but I remember stunting one day. I stood up on some boxes or something, and I said, "Oh, this is what it's like to be up here, like you, Ted." And it is. It's different when you stand up. You give yourself a foot. Your perspective is different. So, in any case, I don't really care that much about it, but I'm saying it. If you could provide something that someone feels like they're missing, that's desirable, that appeals to their emotions, and tells them that they're always right and everyone else is wrong in a very simplistic manner, well, you can get them. You can get them pretty easily. And that's all that the sloganeering is about. It's about saying things like, believe all women, right? Believe all women. That's a sloganeering thing. That's a Marxist sloganeering slogan put out there to subvert the truth, because the truth doesn't matter. Only the revolution matters.
And whether or not Mao knew what Gramsci wrote, it's basically the same kind of thing. What Gramsci had said was that we have this cultural hegemony, and cultural hegemony it's like a force field of values, norms, expectations, behaviors, what Ibram Kendi calls policies. It's the system in every bit of its manifestations, everything that happens and why it happens and how. And this thing is like keeping out communism because it's like a force field, okay? So he says the only way to beat that is to get inside the key cultural institutions that generate this cultural hegemony, create a counter hegemony from within and break them apart. This is cultural Marxism, which he derived from his working very early on in the 1910s with George Lukács and with Max Horkheimer and some of the other people who went on to found the Frankfurt School.
So the purpose of this is to get into the institutions. Now, we all know Yuri Bezmenov, right? We know what Yuri said and stated. I've heard people recently say, well, I don't think that the Soviets, really infiltrated us. No, they did. They did. It's not because there's still some Soviet Union or anything like that. It's because here in the West, we took in communist intellectuals, not necessarily even from the Soviet Union, but they were sympathizers. And we encouraged it and propped it up because these folks, mostly in universities, who think this way are useless people. And so this makes them useful. Being a professor at a college is actually not that hard of a job. Sorry, I'm going to say it. It's not. You have assistants, you have other students to help you out, student professors, whatever else. And you develop a system for it. And those people make good money. A lot of people say, oh, they're school teachers, they don't make a lot. Dude, college professors make like 6 figures. So, or just under, depending on the college, right? And so basically, you are propped up in a position of power and leadership. And you tell these people these ideas, these young people who are impressionable, not well educated, because we have a horrible education system in this country. And as you go through these ideas, you ingratiate yourself as some genius and some wonder worker who has educated these poor students who were naive to the realities of the world, and now you have enlightened them with gnosis, and through that they are now better people, and you are a good person for being on the right side of history. And that's how this stuff gets perpetuated. Bezmenov was completely right, but all of this was in part organic and in part supplantation, right? And the people that supplanted this, though, they weren't necessarily just the Russians. They were people that were talking about this a long time ago. I often bring up guys like Cecil B. Rhodes and the Rhodes Scholars. Pete Buttigieg and William Jefferson Clinton, our former president, Rhodes Scholars. Well, what's a Rhodes Scholar? Well, their whole thing, Cecil B. Rhodes' whole thing, was to bring back the lost colonies, the colonies that broke off and became independent, back under the crown. Georgetown University is a school of Jesuits who are also very much working in that Rhodes Scholar plan. You can read about that from guys like Carroll Quigley, and he did a lot of documentations on it. He was a professor there. He talks about how the systems work of these rulers and how they are circles within circles within circles, meaning the people at the top don't have to do much because they have underlings doing things, and those underlings have people under them doing things. And so once you get so far out in these concentric circles, you get big groups that have no clue that someone's feeding them way down the line what they're going to do. Now, sometimes it's a lot more blatant, like the Great Reset and Build Back Better. But often people don't understand what they're involved with. And again, it gets into the educational systems. We've been doing this for a long time through the Rockefeller Foundation, right? We've been dumbing down our students and taking away education from the local municipalities and giving it more to the federal government and the states. This is not good. This is wrong, of course, but the money's been good. People go to, oh, that's free daycare. My kid's in school. Everyone goes to school. It's how you socialize them. Well, I hate to tell you, but socializing your children is part of the grooming. And maybe you think it's good not to see your kid that many times a day or times a week, many hours a week. I mean, maybe you don't like your kids. Some people don't. But for me, I relish spending time with my children. It's a wonderful thing. And I want to imprint on them as much as I can of the things that I've learned through my life and how to treat people, how to act, how to make good decisions, those things. And you're not doing that by sending your kids to public school. The teachers are doing that. Mind you, most teachers do not have the same level of influence as parents, but then aside from the teachers, then you get the peers. And my daughter just went through this in high school. She's graduated now. She graduated last year, but graduated at 16, mind you. She wanted to get done because she couldn't stand all the nonsense. She had literally had a friend break up with her, quit being friends with her over wokeness. That's a hard thing to deal with when you're 16 years old and still emotionally maturing. This is stuff that shouldn't even be in the ether. And it can only destroy. That's all it ever does. It only consumes. It's an all-consuming fire of the soul of every person who touches this, who believes this, and every nation that embraces it. So with that, we have the Long March and all of those things, we get to what is basically known as the New Left.
Marcuse, we have kind of three things to mention, and then we'll jump track for a minute. Out of Marcuse, we have kind of three things to mention. We have the emergence of the New Left, which he's considered kind of the father of. The New Left is kind of the radical anti-war, very frankly neo-Marxist left that had abandoned old Marxism, vulgar Marxism, and taken a new track. They characterized themselves by their vocal opposition to the Vietnam War primarily, and that was supposed to be what made them new, but it was in fact that they had abandoned vulgar Marxism for neo-Marxism. So the left is now...
You guys are awesome, by the way. Was it the French? Yeah. Well, it was the Spanish Jesuits who did the Inquisition, right? That people like to bring up about the sins of the Catholic Church. But yeah, I don't really know. I just know that the Jesuit order was more or less a reaction to the Protestants, and they have done some pretty terrible things throughout history. And I know people that tell me, "Oh no, the Jesuits I know are great," and it's like maybe they are. Maybe that individual is a good, godly man, but the order, well, I don't know. I don't trust it.
Characterized not by being materialist Marxist, but by being culturally Marxist. Secondly, we have the Frankfurt School continuing with Jürgen Habermas taking over, and Jürgen Habermas is irrelevant. There's some interesting stuff. He softened critical theory as he went. By the 80s, he's criticizing the stuff that was happening in the 60s, but nobody cares. He's just a philosopher, because Herbert Marcuse had brought in people from those radicalized activist groups and incorporated them into his vision, in particular his doctoral student, Angela Davis, who is still alive and still very much relevant to the prison and police abolition movements at the heart of what's happened over the last year. She endorsed Joe Biden for president, by the way.
Of course she did. And Joe Biden's all a part of this too. Almost all the Democrats. It's not just the AOCs. AOC's just brave enough to go out there and claim that she's basically a communist. Now she'll say differently, right? Just a socialist, and it's all social justice, but the language is all the same. The ends are always the same, right? And they are. It is a might makes right mentality. I mean, they literally. I told you in the beginning of this, I played the thing about repressive tolerance. They literally believe that they've been repressed throughout history, therefore they are justified in repressing and hurting and killing you.
On Russia Today, of all things. She also, in 1977, wrote a letter of support to Jim Jones in his last year, because little do people realize Jim Jones wasn't a crazy lunatic Christian. He was a Marxist.
Jim Jones, Jonestown, the Kool-Aid thing. When people say drink the Kool-Aid, that's what that reference is to, if you guys aren't aware of that. Now, Jim Jones was a preacher, but he was first and foremost a communist and murdered everybody in his compound. Killed a congressman, or was it a senator? I don't remember. Shot him on a tarmac. People ran off to the woods. There were very few survivors. And people lined their children up and gave them Kool-Aid laced with cyanide. So you wonder why I'm a skeptic at following leaders just blindly. There's a good example of why you shouldn't.
And his movement was fundamentally Marxist. And so she wrote, she didn't write a letter. It was actually on the radio. She was on the radio, and it's been transcribed. She radioed in a statement of support for Jim Jones. We're with you. We're behind you. Your movement and ours are the same, blah, blah, blah. So, don't drink the Kool-Aid. But that spawns the black feminists, is ultimately what the Angela Davis direction spawns. Angela Davis, of course, got involved in this prison and police stuff, but she also got involved in K-12 education after getting arrested for seeming to kidnap I think, federal judge with a shotgun or something like that. Because these are good people, as you can tell. Big fan of Cuba, big fan of what's going on in China. Refused to condemn she's for liberation, refused to condemn the imprisonment of dissidents in communist regimes, et cetera. So liberation means something pretty polarized, pretty repressive tolerance style. So three things happen at once, and you have the Frankfurt School falling into philosophical irrelevance under Jürgen Habermas. Not to say his philosophy is not interesting, I guess it is, but it's not relevant to the world today and what's happening, because the track went separately into black liberationism and black feminism and a raft of other new left movements. And this emergence of the new left, which was activist and scholarly, infiltrating the university.
So with their infiltration of the university, they, they pushed their plans, and it's not just the, guys, I want to make sure I have the right videos set up here. Anyways, it's not just that they, got into the university. Again, like I said, they got into legal scholarship. They got into the government itself. They got into the language. They got into every aspect of the culture, if you would, of the society, right? Every single aspect. And most people don't even know that probably half or more of what they believe is all just indoctrination from these systems, from these people who have been able to proliferate it as, this big, great deception of equality and all this other stuff. It's literally like, I've had people tell me in the past, well, dude, why do we need money? That kind of thing, right? I bring it up on occasion. Wouldn't it be great if we could just trade and barter? Yeah. Let me haul my bed over to your house because I need to trade. You need a bed. I have an extra bed. I don't need my bed anymore. And you got flour or something. That makes a lot of sense. Or maybe we can have a system that represents my labor and your labor. And, I want flour from you. And instead of me trading because I have an extra bed, I work so many hours, and then this thing that's a note, money, basically says that, hey, I did work, and you can take this for an exchange and give me stuff, and then you can go use that for whatever you want to exchange it for. Right? It's a little bit simpler, right? It's a little bit simpler of a system. Mind you, I'd prefer not to be on a fiat system, but maybe we won't be, because Russia's talking about turning to a gold system, and the yuan is going to be the global currency here probably by 2030. Pretty certain of that. I might be wrong. Hopefully I am, but yeah, the U.S. is purposely being destroyed right now monetarily. And I was going to talk about a little bit about that stuff today, but I figured maybe I can save that for Tuesday. So, and I should be able to stream Tuesday, guys. I think I'm only working 3 days this week. So should be some content coming out for me this week for sure. So anyways, let's keep moving. I got like 2 more clips from Lindsay here. Then we're going to look at some tweets and stuff. We're going to talk about this grooming and all these things that are going on, of course, in more depth.
And so cultural hegemony, he said, has to be beaten by infiltrating the major culture institutions, and he named 5. Those are religion, family, education, media, and law.
So religion, family, education, media, and law. So religion, your spiritual guidance. Well, Marxism unto itself is a religion. And so this, though, is something that we see, and I streamed Friday. I was talking directly about this kind of stuff. Lindsay has talked about this stuff. This stuff, the wokeness, is infiltrating the churches. It has been for a long time, a very long time. My father has a minister friend that has said stuff, from the pulpit that he didn't like, and I didn't like either. Talking poorly about men and acting like men cause all the problems. Like, this is ingrained in our society, right? It's not like women, they're always good, they're always great. Men, we're just brutes, right? And of course that has been out there for a long time and disintegrates or degenerates the family. And of course the education system completely woke, right? We got teachers talking about how they're still going to teach CRT even though they can't teach it. Go check out Accuracy in Media for clips of that. They've been doing some undercover stuff, and I personally know Adam. He's on it, man. He's a good guy in the fight for liberty. That's their CEO, by the way. If you didn't catch that, so sorry. The media. What do we get all the time from Hollywood and the news outlets? Constantly. The narrative, like we talked about the repressive tolerance earlier, Lindsay hit up about in the Hunter Biden laptop, right? I can go back to, we can go back to 1955, I think it was, when Leon Skolson read into the congressional record the, 50 some odd points or whatever points it is from the Naked Communist or the Naked Socialist. I forget which book it originally is from. But, here we have an FBI agent reading the communist plans into the congressional record, and almost everything they've done has been implemented. But they were Soviet plans. This isn't from Soviet Russia, folks. It's from within. And, over on Rumble, Fartwith said something. What was that? War, we've always been at war with Eurasia. Yeah, of sorts, but it's a false dichotomy, man. It's about the synthesis. See, the extreme kind of communism that was going on in the East doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. It's not economically sustainable, right? Despite what Marx believed, you actually, capitalism, free markets are actually sustainable. And so we went into China and then said, well, hey, how about you have some capitalism with your socialism? Synthesis, guys, synthetic society. And then, of course, there's law. And we see how this is exercised in law, not just by CRT written in the law, but judges as well who are indoctrinated with this. In fact, talk to most lawyers, watch LawTube, and the lawyers on YouTube will tell you, like, a lot of the stuff, these people are indoctrinated. Listen to Robert Barnes. He talks about this. These people are indoctrinated that being a lawyer is about some form of activism and changing our society. Everything should not be about changing our society and activism. But that is where we are at. Like, you have your head in the sand if you think this is going away. Maybe it will sort of disappear, but it's going to creep its head up again. I promise you. When I was a young teen, middle school age, the PC movement was strong. I used to watch Bill Maher back then because it's when he first started his show on CBS before he got kicked off because of his remarks about the war in Iraq. But before that, I used to watch him a lot as a kid because I used to watch stuff like that. I always would stay up late and watch 2020 as a kid. I've always been interested in things that kids generally aren't interested in. So, he named his show Politically Incorrect for a reason, because PC was a big deal at the time and it withered out and died just to be reborn as this heinous thing that we're seeing today. And that's probably because of the internet. But it's also largely because of the institutions. And if you don't think for a minute that the global institutions like the UN or the World Economic Forum don't believe in Marxist ideologies, you are sorely mistaken, my friend. Sorely mistaken. Let's not forget that the WHO, the head of the WHO, I think it's still the head of the WHO, is an African communist Chinese sympathizer, right? He believes in communism. And he loves China.
With a special emphasis put on education. Critical race theory arose out of law. That's how it got into law. Education. Very rapidly, critical race theory got into education. Paulo Freire was a Gramscian. That's not in doubt. he was putting it into education. That was picked up by people like Henry Giroux, who is a name you probably haven't heard, but he's probably one of the most influential people on our society. In 1980, he published, or 1981 thereabouts, he published his first major book. What had happened was he had read The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and then later he had actually met Paulo Freire. He seemed to have become radicalized. He talks about the guy like somebody would talk about a cult leader. It's kind of weird and fawning to read how he writes about Paulo Freire and his influence. And Giroux's books are totally mental. Like, if you want to see the melting pot, the mixing pot where all this stuff came together, it was in the education theory stuff, because all they cared about was the mission. All they cared about was operational success. So they picked from everything. Where you have Freire citing Lenin and Mao, or sorry, he doesn't cite Mao, he just praises him, citing Lenin and citing Marx, and very purely Marxist. Giroux's not quite so coarse, not so vulgar, but he's citing Freire, he's citing Marcuse, he's citing Horkheimer, he's citing Adorno. The neo-Marxist element there is undeniable. And even throughout recent papers, and like I mentioned last night, Alison Bailey's paper from 2017 in Hypatia, The Privilege Preserving Epistemic Pushback, she has a whole section about neo-Marxism being integral to the critical pedagogy project. So that's really how that all mixed into our society. So this becomes very kind of relevant within that new left milieu. And cultural Marxism, though, was going to infiltrate those institutions and change them from within. And of course, we see that. We see that in every single one of the ones mentioned. It's crept into religion. They've been fighting it vigorously in the Southern Baptist Convention. I think we have a Marxist Pope. It's certainly within Presbyterian Church. It's certainly within the Episcopal Church. It's certainly within Buddhism, Islam on the liberal side, etc. It's infiltrating into every religion. And its goal is to create one kind of giant ecumenical faith that uses the trappings of, say, Catholicism to preach social justice, or uses the trappings of evangelicism to preach social justice. They're all saying the same thing using different language. And that's actually what Marcuse calls for in the Essay on Liberation, because he says, to do this, to get this new sensibility, we have to create a new language. The old saying I mentioned last night is that communists share your vocabulary, but they don't share your dictionary. They use the same words and they mean something different by them that's specialized to their second dimensional thinking.
And this is important too, because you'll find when you talk to commies, you can't have a real conversation with them. They think that fascism is capitalism. Why? Because, well, at some point, Stalin decided to claim anyone who wasn't a communist the way that they were communist. Well, they were right-wingers. They were fascists. And it's just an absurd thing when actually fascism is far closer to how these things play out than the philosophy of communism and Marx's vision of this utopia. It never happens. When you allow a state to be built up and become authoritarian, it doesn't relinquish its power and control. It just maintains itself. And it exerts more power and more control.
They're critical theory. They have specialized definitions. And so it's infiltrated into faith. They're obviously trying to destroy childhood innocence in the family. They're criticizing the idea of the nuclear family. That was explicitly on the Black Lives Matter mission website before they took that down. They're like, wait, people see that? Destroying the idea of fatherhood explicitly. They want to replace the family with the institution. Everybody says with the state. They have an intermediate step. It's the institution. These people think in terms of institutions. Institutions are the fundamental unit of society within critical theories.
So he's going to go on about this. The fundamental first institution of all institutions is the family. This harkens back, of course, to Plato's Republic. Plato believed, much like these people do, that if you kept the young children from ever seeing evil, and if they always looked at beautiful things, that they would somehow grow up and be good people. This is absurd. That's not how people are made, good or bad or whatever. Restraint, teaching them restraint, giving kids tools to deal with problems and issues, talking to them, being a leader and an example to them. That's how you train children to be good citizens and good, productive individuals, right? But Plato thought, no, it was the parents, and we had to strip the parents away specifically because, well, they could be bad. And we need this. The whole of society was more important. Of course, I say Plato. He says Socrates said all this. I don't know. If you read the Republic, it's Plato's Republic. It's not, even though he uses Socrates in the dialogue. With that, though, he also believed in three classes of people. And this is a pretty standard metaphysic of the ancient world. He believed that there were people that were of the head, right, of the brain, and those were the highest class of people, the philosopher kings, as he put it. And then there were people of the heart, and those were your warriors. They had good courage and heart, and they were strong, but they weren't good enough to be leaders. They helped the leaders maintain power. And then finally, you had people of the stomach, whose rumbling bellies is what kept them going. They were led by nothing but passion. And these are your artisans, your craftsmen, your day laborers. And let's not forget that Greek society had a lot of slavery in it. So that's how the society gets propped up as well. And basically, communism boils down to the same kind of things. Almost every manifestation has this. You always have your elite leadership classes who have way more privileges than everyone else. Right. And then you have a military class, which has a lot of privilege. And then you have everybody else, which is your slave class. This was written, I don't know, 2,500 years ago or something, and is absolutely relevant today. But this is how these people think about these things. Oh, you're not, and you haven't been indoctrinated into my gnosis. You haven't been illuminated with my genius and what I understand. So, you're kind of lost and you're stuck. And that's why you operate by your belly and it's just all pure desire. You can't think in the big picture. And to some degree, that is true for a lot of people once they're, especially in our society where it's very materialistic. Marx tries to make an anti-materialistic argument that he then basically bolsters up materialism within it, right? The materialism in the end is the value of a human being. Now, it's not, of course, but to say that material things are unequally divided amongst society and that those people have more privilege and power is actually saying that those who don't have material things are of less value. So materialism becomes the value of a human being. And so we all must have equal material in order to be equally valued. Well, that's just absurd, and it's a gross idea. And I mean, trust me, guys, I live in this world. I on occasion struggle with materialistic things as well, but it's not good. Materialism will not get you anywhere. Hoarding things will not make you a happy person. Owning lots of stuff will not make you a happy person. I just saw an interview actually yesterday with Alan Rickson, who is the star of the Jack Reacher show on Amazon, which is a great show, by the way. I was really looking forward to that coming out. Watched it immediately. It was great. It's not woke at all. Well, maybe a tidbit because the girl in there is a little tiny thing and she can kind of handle herself. But other than that, it's just a fun kind of show. And he had a good. If you want to look at heels versus babyface, as he did a video on the Will Smith slap and what Alan Rickson said about it. And I think it's Rickson. I think that's his last name. Anyways, but I ended up catching this other video the other day, and he was talking about how he in his career got to the top and he had all this money and he was falling down. He was getting into all this nonsense. And he's like, no one tells you that at the top you have all this money, all this power, all this stuff. He's like, there's nothing up there. It's like, yeah, that's right. There isn't anything up there. We are deeper than material beings. I mean, in my faith, Christ is an anti-materialist completely to the point of walking willfully to your death. So keep those things in mind, folks. All right, let's keep going.
And the state is just the largest umbrella institution. So your family is going to be replaced by an institution, whether that's these weird experiments that they did in Europe where they put people in orphanages for no reason, where they try to get rid of parental involvement where they're trying to, we see the NEA, the teachers union, talking about how it's the school's jobs to parent and the parents' jobs to listen to the teachers union. They're trying to they've filtered into the family. And then education, we talked about media. I think I've mentioned CNN, MSNBC, and Joy Reid and Markham Hill like a few times so far. It's all throughout the media. The media has become a critical theory propaganda arm, at least where it's a corporate press. Alternative press obviously is different, but that's throttled because of repressive tolerance. And it's in law, and that's where critical race theory was particularly poignant, because it is originally, for the first 4 years or something, a legal theory. Maybe it's just 3 years that it was just a legal theory. We could figure out how many years it is, not many. So it's into all these institutions. They're turning the institutions from within. The idea, some people refer to this as like a cordyceps process. If you don't know what cordyceps is, it's this fungus that zombifies bugs and it makes them behave in certain ways, and then it grows out of their dead body into a fungus. It's what it does, is it infiltrates an institution, takes over the institution, kills it, wears its skin as a suit, and parades around while draining all of its resources.
Yeah, that's what Marxism is. It is a cordyceps that invades the minds of people and takes them over. It's a virus, and a lot of these people talk about using students as a form of virus. So I got one more from these clips that I clipped, and we're about an hour and a half in. Let me make sure chat's all caught up on. See, we got Fart Whiff over on Rumble. And got a few watchers over on Entropy. No chat, though. No chat. You guys are over there talking about Islam and Sunnis and Shia. And man, it's like way off topic. I understand, though. I know how chats go. So what has happened is they've taken all this, and then they've used like postmodernism, post-structuralism as a tool, as a weapon to then further destroy everyone's minds.
John Baudrillard is the Matrix. If you've seen the Matrix, you know John Baudrillard.
And Baudrillard is the gentleman who really focused on hyper-reality and the synthetic world that we live in. It's absolutely what we live in. But you need to understand that this is part of that push, and why things like the metaverse, transhumanism, trans activist rights, and transgenderism is a big deal. This is again a way it buffers and preps the society for the bigger leaps to come.
Baudrillard actually watched The Matrix and he said, "That's not me." But his most famous book, which is Simulation and Simulacra, is actually featured in The Matrix when Neo's got his little contraband at the beginning and he's hiding it in a book and he tucks it in a drawer before he meets Morpheus. The book is Simulation and Simulacra, or Simulacra and Simulation. John Baudrillard. What Baudrillard believed is that we live, because of the media environment, in hyper reality. We have replaced, we have almost like a map of the entire universe. It's a perfect one-to-one map, and we have chosen to live in the map rather than in the actual terrain. And we believe that if we change the map, then that's all that matters. Reality bends accordingly. He called this hyper-reality. Hyper-reality is what is more real than real. So you can think of the airbrushed model, more real than real. You can think of the hyper-flavored smoothie. It's more strawberry than strawberry, or whatever it is. It's a local distance reference for those who know his strawberry thing. It's very good. He believed that we live in this state. And if you don't understand that, what he's saying is that because of the environment that we live in, we have access to what might be called a second reality. And that second reality is largely linguistically constructed. And we're kind of swimming in this linguistically constructed world. And we believe that if we just change things in the world of abstractions, then that's good enough. Reality will accord. A pseudo-reality, as I've also referred to it, then that's how people are going to live. He was mostly warning about this. He had this very famous essay he wrote about the Gulf War that he said the Gulf War never happened. It was basically things happened in the Middle East that were warlike, and CNN created a war out of it. All, hyper real fake war. And that's what people believed the Gulf War was. And so that's what the Gulf War was, a very kind of pessimistic analysis. And it's because we live in this world that this stuff works. You can only, you can go on Twitter and you can create a new avatar and you can change your picture and you can change your name and you're somebody new. And you can start to live that. And you can very easily groom yourself or be groomed into new unreal identities. But this is mostly queer theory.
So I'm going to step off and use the bathroom real quick, but I'm going to let this play and just really let this set in, because I clipped these and set them up in this order. And so, though I've been giving commentary, it's taken an hour and a half to get to this. Realize that this whole talk he's talking is like an hour and 20 minutes. So this whole conversation, and I've clipped about maybe 20 minutes of it or something. Other than that first clip I play from you from elsewhere. But keep this in mind. Keep this in mind about all the things that they're pushing, the technologies they're pushing. Keep in mind the plans for the World Economic Forum, how they want to interlink everybody. The idea that Neuralink is coming out. Understand where the future is going. I guess I've become a futurist now because I keep making these predictions, and if I'm sure I will. Maybe I'll get to it this week. But if I can get some time to really work on my book, I might have it out in the next 5 years. But a lot of these themes are in there, and it's going to be in there because I see the world going in a direction, and I want people to be prepared. The book isn't about where the world is going per se; it's about bigger things. But these messages need to be put out there. These people need to understand what is coming for them, and the fact of the matter is, most everyone is completely checked out of this. You guys are, you're watching YouTube or Rumble or whatever. You're watching streams. You're not the norm. You're not the average. Some people watch only streams, and they're watching, the Daily Wire all the time, or maybe Crowder, but they're not getting this kind of material. And they're certainly not going to listen to, hours long lectures on the history of critical race theory and how it ties back to Marxism. They don't care. But when we were all locked down and people didn't do anything about it, well, all of a sudden they saw what was going on in the schools, and it sparked a fire. Pay attention to that, though, because people forget really quickly. They forget very quickly. And, I haven't heard about anything in Loudoun County and the school board in the news in a while. It's pretty interesting. I live one county over from Loudoun County. I haven't heard anything in a while. We know that there was a boy who was dressing as a girl who raped some people. We know that they didn't take any real action, just sent him to another school. The father was quite angry about that. We know that CRT's been in there. We know that all across the country, CRT's in there. And right now there's a bill for parental rights in Florida that the left is propagandizing, saying it is the Don't Say Gay bill. And they are mad about it. Are they? Or are they just virtue signaling? I don't know. But what I do know is that you need to pay attention, because a lot of you folks are going to put your kids in school anyways, and they're going to get indoctrinated. And that's going to be on you, because I warned you. I told you so. And it's up to you to make that decision. So let's listen to Lindsay and talk about the synthetic society and how they use this in postmodernism as tools to break all of this down. Basically, people who aren't very good at logic, at reasoning, at figuring out things, they're the ones that fall prey to this.
But this also taps into the idea that we're going to hyper-focus on race. We're going to think in terms of these social constructions that are somehow structurally determinate. Social constructions are linguistic and political constructs that then have material consequences. And so it's all still relevant. These postmodern ideas are the milieu in which the people, the activists that we talked about in cynical theories in the 1980s and 1990s were looking at and saying, wow, these are weapons. Let's make people live in hyper-reality. Let's hollow out meaning through Derridian deconstruction so that we can mold the world as we will. Let's criticize everything fairly ruthlessly in terms of how it's just a power dynamic and localized knowledge and there is no access to truth. And every claim that you have access to truth is actually an assertion of power from Foucault. We could also tie in, I guess, Jean-Francois Lyotard here, who wrote in The Postmodern Condition in 1979, a section on legitimation by parology, which sounds very complicated. Legitimation by parology means we go with the consensus. We believe consensus is truth. He's warning, this is not a good idea, but this is the nature of the world. Whatever the consensus is real. And so you can see the attempt to weaponize.
So whatever the consensus is real. Keep that in mind, right? Think about all the manufactured consensus that you've seen in the last 2 years. Now, there's been plenty more than that. But let's go to the, so I don't get so in trouble with YouTube. Instead of talking about more obvious things, let's talk about the Hunter Biden laptop thing real quick. In that, they had a consensus, a manufactured consensus, that it was a fake story. 50 intelligence officers said it was a fake story. That was a manufactured consensus by the experts, right? Like, this is why I'm so skeptical of everything all the time. This is why I'm not going to listen to your expert. I don't know who he is. I don't trust him. I trust my friends who are experts. I do. You know, I have friends that are experts in things, but I know them. I know how they think. I know what they know, and I know if they're honest actors or not. And that's the other problem about listening to an expert, because you can listen to someone on economics like Paul Krugman, and he's supposedly an expert, yet his economic predictions are 100% wrong 100% of the time, right? He is never right about anything. And the things that he says are ridiculous, absurd, and have nothing to do with the reality of how economies or monies work. But it is, in his mind, the reality, because he believes that he can play, you know, the central banker. He can be, the authoritarian government that keeps money flowing in the right way and props up the people. Yet every ounce of data suggests that's actually not how that works. It works in the opposite. It actually destroys the people's purchasing power. But, you know, he's an expert, right? And then you'll hear all the MSNs and the CNNs and the whomever else is touting what Paul Krugman said, even though I don't know he's ever been right about anything.
This in the manufacture of consensus. How? With repressive tolerance. You believe the wrong thing? We'll silence you. There's a consensus in the medical community about racism being a public health threat. Look, every third article in the Lancet now covers it. There's a consensus now about whatever the issue is, whether it's climate change, racism, the virus, the pandemic, or whatever. We're going to create a forced consensus by shutting out all alternative opinions. They've weaponized that concept. That's postmodernism applied. That's why Helen and I called it applied postmodernism in cynical theories. And it turns out that the people who applied it were the neo-Marxists. So I'm going to read a couple of things to you. One of them is really long, so I might not read the whole thing. So just to be very clear that we are dealing with, in critical race theory, a neo-Marxist movement. I'm going to turn to critical race theory, the key writings that form the movement. This is from the introduction. And who did they say organized critical race theory? Organized by a collection of neo-Marxist intellectuals.
Okay, so this is vitally important. Everyone who says that CRT isn't Marxist or whatever else is lying to you, or they are ignorant or a moron. These people all have Marxist ties. They all have a lineage of Marxist ties. That's what his entire video is about, where I've clipped it from. And they admit to their Marxism right here.
Well, there you go. Former New Left activists, ex-counterculturalists. That's a nice way to put people who blew up the Capitol and stuff. And other varieties of oppositionalists in law schools, the Conference on Critical Legal Studies, where critical race theory was developed, established itself as a network of openly leftist law teachers, students, and practitioners committed to exposing and challenging the ways American law served to legitimize an oppressive social order. So, undoubtedly, critical race theory was organized by a collection of neo-Marxists.
Oh, I had myself muted there. Did you guys just hear me when I just talked? Was I muted when I paused the video? Or did I just mute myself again? Anyways, so there you have it, guys. The what I was saying, if that didn't come across, because I actually don't know if I was muted or not. When I paused it there, I was saying, anytime you have a question, people will say, "Oh, this is Marxist," or "It's not Marxist." CRT isn't Marxist. Blah blah blah. Yes, it is. They all have roots to Marxism. It's what I was saying is the video, the full video explains that. That's the point of it. It's the point of Lindsay's new book. We can hear you. You were indeed muted. See, Spook says I was muted. So Spook, you want the lecture? I actually have Twitter up right now. I can send it to you in a minute, bud. You want the lecture that I got that from? So yeah, you can hear me now. So I paused the video and I was saying that these people that argue that these folks aren't Marxist or it doesn't come from Marxism, they say it in their own writings. So let's stop the nonsense, okay? So that brings me on specifically to groomers. Now, this was a thread going around the other day on Twitter. There's a couple of them, actually. I want to show you. It says, I'm seeing a lot of people on the right share this meme. While it may be a strong satirical response to those who get lost in nuance, it fundamentally fails to recognize why the left wants to talk to your kids about sexuality. Let's connect some dots. And he's like, don't make me tap the sign. And he's got Aaron McIntyre. It's not rocket science, guys. They're just evil and want to diddle kids. And so the point of this thread, actually, this guy's from what I could tell, I looked into his stuff a little bit, he's Christian. But I don't think he's making all these connections. I don't know. I didn't actually read through this whole thread because I actually came across others. And the first thing, though, that he says is the left doesn't want to diddle kids. They want to create little revolutionaries. False. They want to do both. They want to absolutely do both. And part of diddling kids is part of the indoctrination and part of the atomization of the structure of reality. It's part of the psychopathy that they are going after. So I didn't clip this. This may not sound the best, given that it's going to play through a tab. But we're going to play the very beginning of Groomer Schools, Part 1, the long cultural Marxist history of sex education. And this, again, is James Lindsay's New Discourses. Just going to listen to a few minutes of it in the very beginning. But it's a good podcast to listen to, guys. You want to know more about this stuff, go to James Lindsay's channel. He goes through this stuff. He reads it on air. He spends a lot of time on this. This is like his obsession. And like I said, as far as I'm concerned, he is probably the foremost expert in the United States right now on this who isn't an actual leftist.
Hello, everyone. This is James Lindsay. You're listening to the New Discourses podcast, and we're going to talk about something sick today. This is a podcast I really should have done a long time ago. I'm going to base this off of a thread I did on Twitter, apparently on the 9th of July, 2020. It's something that I've actually been thinking about for almost as long as I've been aware of what's going on in what we might call the critical social justice or woke literature, academic literature. But I didn't really realize the full depth of it, even in July of 2020. And it's really about what's going on in our schools, but also more broadly in social media and more broadly in mass media regarding
the kind of the tip of the iceberg of this is actually the sexualization of children through critical theories of identity. Although, like I said, it's just a tip of the iceberg, because there's also, the racialization of children through things like critical race theory. And the other kind of critical theories of society being crammed into children, whether it's post-colonial, whether it's, gender, sex, sexuality, whether it's race, whether it's even ability status, fat status, or whatever else, or even a more broad, just blanket critical theory of society that dips into, capitalism and so on. And what I wanted to say, and I'll actually just read a little bit of these tweets I put out, this thread I put out, which now has over 4,000 likes. It got a lot of attention at the time. I put this out, like I said, in July 2020, and I said, this seems like it's coming out of nowhere, but it's based on a conversation I had with someone earlier, and it turned out to be in private, explaining an important aspect of woke culture that many of us perceive but few understand. One of the targets that woke culture wants to dismantle is the innocence of children. And it's very important to understand the way that these critical theories think about the innocence of children. They see the innocence of children as a fundamental problem that has to be overcome in order to achieve their liberation, to achieve sexual liberation of children, to achieve gender liberation, to achieve racial liberation. And so all of this stuff that's kind of being mainlined to the genderbread person, etc., you might have seen in schools, the rampant use of pronouns, all of this stuff that comes out of gender theory, but more importantly, queer theory, which is Marxist queer theory, by the way, a neo-Marxist, I suppose, if we have to be technical. All the kind of stuff that we see with the racialization of children in schools, all of this stuff exists to obliterate the innocence of children, which the woke actually see as a hegemonic narrative that maintains the existing order and relations of society that must be dismantled if we are to achieve revolution. And so who better to destabilize than children? We could get into a lot, and we will get into a lot, but the easiest, since the kind of queer stuff, and now we have to deal with this MAP, which is a rebranding of pedophilia. It means minor attracted person, as they put it, but it really just means men acting as pedophiles. And I guess it doesn't have to be men, it could be women, but the P should stand for pedophile. And so sometimes you'll see it as MAI, minor attracted individual. But you're seeing now a push for this in conjunction with all of these kind of very sexual books that are supposed to be gender queer or whatever. They're supposed to be revealing and reaching into the schools, in school libraries, sometimes I think in curriculum. I don't know for sure if it's in curriculum anywhere, but they're certainly being found in libraries everywhere with these very explicit, sexually explicit graphic novels depicting oral sex, talking about and teaching about anal sex and rimming to often young kids. Sometimes I've heard as young as, 3rd and 4th grade. And the point is to obliterate childhood innocence. But within queer theory, it goes even further because queer theory is grooming ideology, Marxist grooming ideology. That's what it has to be understood as. Because the definition of queer within queer theory is an identity without an essence. And so the purpose there isn't just to break down childhood innocence, which is a hegemonic narrative to them that maintains existing social relations that must therefore be disrupted and dismantled. It is also to literally to destabilize individuals as children and to make them susceptible to politically actionable points of view, because if they can't understand themselves, or as I've put it in many talks now, if they can't get based by knowing who they are and being difficult to move off of that knowledge of who they are, then they're very easily politically manipulable. They will be depressed. They will be anxious. They will be groomable, as a matter of fact, because they have to be leaning into these identities without an essence. They have to identify with not knowing who they are. And this destabilization is quite intentional and has actually, and this is kind of the point of this podcast, I don't want to go into the details of a book that depicts oral sex being done on a person wearing a strap-on dildo being in children's schools. And if you're shocked at hearing this, by the way, remember, your shock. If you're shocked at hearing this, your shock should be directed not at me for saying it, but at the fact that this is in books that are in libraries.
All right, we're going to leave it there. So he goes on about this, right? It's an hour and 15 minutes ish. The point is literally to destabilize and hurt these children in order to make them good little revolutionaries. It's quite sad because we consider them innocent, but in Marxist theory, no one is innocent. No one is innocent. Now, another clip from the queer theory thing, and then we're going to look at some Twitter stuff here and some articles, and then I'm probably going to get out of here for the day. Another thing we're going to listen to is from that video I clipped earlier about that 10-minute, summation of Marxism. And within that, he goes on to talk about how queer theory is just, sexual Marxism. And here it is.
Turn to Paulo Freire since I mentioned him. We could do more identity politics. Doesn't matter. Well, you get the point. All you have to do is figure out what the special kind of property is, and then they have some name for the for that kind of property, and then they have like ability or like.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is I think this is about the educational system. I think the other ones, he's going to go through this. These are pretty short clips, though. Either way, they're here to indoctrinate, obviously, right? But listen to their actual words. See what they actually have to say. They are open about it. When they say, "Oh no, we're not here to indoctrinate," when they go after your children, the minor attracted persons, the pedos, they say that, oh no, it's perfectly natural and all that stuff. Oh, they're not innocent. This is the sickness of their mind. As Fartwith said over on Rumble, Marxism is the embrace of the Antichrist. He said, too quiet. Volume way too soft. And then it went to much better. I have nothing to do with that. That's all because I shared a tab. So sorry. But basically, he was just talking a few minutes about how why the indoctrination of Marxists is there. When I cut a clip, it has a lot better audio, Fartwith.
Whiteness or whatever. And then they say certain people have access to it. And those people have created an ideology where they believe it's normal, and acceptable and correct and right and justified that they get access to it and everybody else doesn't. And so the goal is to awaken a consciousness of that fact and then flip the entire system over. That's it. Why? To create equitable outcomes that are first enforced, socialism or equity, and then that becomes spontaneous, communism or justice. Okay, now Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire, this is where it gets more abstract and subtle. Paulo Freire is the education theorist upon whom all of North American education is now based.
All of North American education is now based on a Marxist theory.
He's most famous for his book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which if you've had any contact with a school of education, you are familiar with. In fact, you probably had to do something with it. That book is the third most highly cited book in the social sciences and humanities. It is an incredibly influential book. It is the text, basically, of critical pedagogy, and it is the book at the center of every college of education in North America, and has been probably since about 1985, when his other book, The Politics of Education, launched him into the American scene. Paulo Freire, this is a little more subtle. Paulo Freire sets up a special... Paulo Freire was interested, according to his own dictates, in adult literacy education of peasants in South America, particularly, but not exclusively, in the countries of Brazil, Chile, and Argentina. He was actually exiled from Brazil for being a problem, and so he went to Chile and Argentina and fucked them up too. That's the long and short of that. And so... for him, there's a special kind of property called literacy, which means being educated in the existing system, which means being educated as the existing system sees education, which means actually being educated in a way that makes you competent within the existing, especially economic and social structure. You've been groomed to fit in with the existing society and to be productive within it. But Marxists think the entire existing society is the problem and needs to be overthrown. So being educated or being literate, which includes political literacy, either in the existing system or for Freire of the oppressive nature of the existing system. Literacy becomes, educated becomes, meaning educated as like, he would say it's false education, education within the existing system so you can be productive within it rather than overthrowing it. Educated or literate becomes a form of special property.
So, just for the sake of time, I'm going to cut it there. But education is property. Literacy, now he means in the classical sense, not that you can't read, but that you are associated, acquainted with, have read the classics, or have an understanding a variety of disciplines, like we generally teach people, reading, writing, arithmetic, that kind of thing, and then the sciences and social sciences and yada yada yada. At least that's how we do it here in the States generally. So that is again a form of this currency, this special privilege, and it becomes Marxism. So I'm going to play this about the queers and the queer theory.
It's all about just figuring out what the special kind of property is that they identify. Okay, so now we go a little further into the gender theory and queer theory department. Queer theory is a war upon the normal. The definition of queer is identity without an essence, or that which resists being normalized. So the special kind of property in queer theory, or gender theory broadly, which by the way came out of this feminism, to separate sex roles, feminists started to argue that gender is where the roles really lie. If you're a woman, you're supposed to act womanly, and so sex roles are assigned, but they're attached to what it means to be feminine, which is a gender assignment. And so gender is socially constructed in order to keep women down. The gender construction itself, by the way, is part of the ideology of patriarchy. Men are supposed to be this way, women are supposed to be that way. That's the ideology. Men deserve society because of this. Women need to stay in the home because of that. That's the ideology. So the social construction of gender goes even further in queer theory, and it becomes a social construction of sex, gender, sexuality, and virtually everything else, including mental health status and so on. Fat status and ability status as well, but we'll get to those. And so what we now have with queer theory, and this is, like I said, this is very simple. There's a special kind of property called being normal. Normalcy, fitting within the broad norms of society, how you should dress, how you should.
Well, Ignatius, he's actually about to talk about the normalcy issue. Yeah. Guys, the one is the Discord that I put there. Hopefully that link went into YouTube. I don't have the YouTube stream pulled up. The one is for the Interest by the Memes channel. I've done nothing with it really. Tank and I started it forever ago, and just, we have all these little side things that we just don't do much with. I was hoping that he he would run a lot more of that stuff, but no, I'm a one-man show basically, and he shows up. But then that's my personal Discord account. I get a lot of memes on Discord, but you guys, if you want to hit me up, I can't give you a ton of my time, but I can definitely chat with you on occasion. And Spook, I sent you 2 links on Twitter.
Act, what it means to act as a man or a woman, what genders are, that there are 2, not many, not hundreds, that men tend to be attracted to women, that men tend to identify as male, that women tend to identify as female and tend to be attracted to men. This creates a broad, sweeping ideology that justifies why some people are normal and get full access to society and others are considered abnormal and are excluded from full access to society, often by being labeled as mentally ill. That's called cis-heteronormativity, and sometimes it's cis-heteropatriarchy if they want to add in the feminism that they're now getting away from, because feminism intrinsically maintains a sex binary, which is a problem. Which, by the way, is where we saw with Yuri Bezdomov saying that he was the stupid, useful idiot leftists are going to get put against the wall and shot as soon as the revolution proceeds past them, because they're no longer useful, but are in fact dangerous. This is why you see the queer, trans, etc. ideology throwing women under the bus. This is why Leah Thomas is being upheld as this massive success story while he destroys women's sports. This is why we have to put pronouns on everything. This is why. And it's too late. The feminists can't get it back. They went into social constructivism and they don't have a tool to get it back. They tried to base their argument on something that is a slippery slope, which is social constructivism. If they try to say social constructions end at gender and don't extend to sex, like Judith Butler suggested that they do, then they're trying to uphold the status quo of a sex binary, and they're conservative, in fact, counter-revolutionary.
Did you catch that? So within their own ideology, if they don't go with that continued progress that Budgie just put up here, if they don't go with that continued progress, then they're considered right-wingers. They're excised. There is nothing about this religion, this faith, that is productive. It is wholly destructive. There is nothing about it that is good. It is the probably the greatest portion of the Great Deception, the thing that would that Christ predicted would come over the masses and delude them into, away from him, away from reality, away from God. So I don't know, guys. It's pretty hairy. I'm going to play the rest of this and we'll look at some Twitter stuff. I'm going to get out of here then.
And so now the revolution is turned upon them and women more broadly and has lined them up against the ideological wall and shot them. And that's why feminism doesn't matter anymore, because queer theory took it over. So there's this property called normalcy, being normal. It creates a superstructure of the normal in society, the acceptable. And then there's the unacceptable, abnormal. That's the infrastructure. They're in dialectical interplay. This causes trauma and harm and all of these things. And it's put together by an ideology of cis heteronormativity, that it is normal, thus correct, because there's a pun on statistical normalcy versus moral normalcy.
Because they speak their own language. So normal to them is a morality. Normal to me, when I say that, or normative or anything like that, because, sorry guys, I spent a lot of time in college in social sciences. But the reality is that that normal is, or the norm is, just a baseline state of the majority of the people, right? That's all it is. It doesn't mean anything of a moral implication. But see, they have to make it that way because, as in one of the videos I played earlier, he talked about they have to instill a new morality. Well, what is the new morality? Well, I think Fartwith nailed it earlier in the Rumble chat. It is the antithesis of Christianity. It's Luciferianism. It's the Antichrist. It is everything in opposition to the biblical narrative and story, and all that is righteous and all that is good and all that is lovely and all that is beautiful. And it's an affront to the truth, which is the highest value, folks, or at least mine, but it should be the highest value because that's what God is. God is truth, and he's love, and he's light. And all of this is an affront to that. Started by a guy who was a miserable person, who wasn't very intellectually solid, who was proven wrong immediately, who was a horrible character to everyone in his life, including his own children. And yet, here we have millions, maybe hundreds of millions or billions even, of people who buy this ideology in some form or another.
Being played here, that it is normal, thus correct, to be cisgender, as they say, which means that if you're a man, you think you're a man. If you're a woman, you think you're a woman. And then to be heterosexual, because statistically speaking, the very large proportion of people fall into both of those categories. And so you have the exact same Marxist dynamic, and the goal is that the abnormal will now seize the means of the production of normalcy. This is why you hear Douglas Murray talking about homonormativity being the goal, to make homosexuality normal and heterosexuality abnormal, to make trans normal and cis, if you will, because that is not a real thing, abnormal, because they're going to seize the means of the production of normalcy and overturn it and force an equitable situation where the abnormal is the normal until that becomes what everybody accepts, at which point we'll finally have sex, gender, and sexual justice. The LGBTQ plus or whatever agenda you want to call this. All right. So now we have queer theory is sex, gender, and sexuality Marxism. That's all it is. That's all it is. The exact same ideology reproduced in a different domain.
And of course, they are oppressed, right? And you being normal, heterosexual, is your special privilege and currency. Mind you, I actually believe homosexuals have a choice not to be homosexual. Not that they, I mean, I'm attracted to women all the time. I'm married to one. I don't cheat on my wife. You know, I have a choice not to cheat on my wife. I like sex. I like women a lot. I used to indulge a lot. I don't now because I don't find it moral. I don't find it to be right, and I don't find it to be edifying for myself spiritually. But, you know, apparently that's repressive. I'm repressing myself for not cheating on my wife, right? That's how these things go. That's how these things go from these folks. So, like I said, I wanted to spend just a little bit more on a few Twitter threads I found interesting coming up this past week. From local distance, the Hampton City School District in Virginia has passed a set of guidelines which says teachers can change their students' gender without telling the parents. What? Under these guidelines, teachers can help your kids change genders behind your back and never have to tell you. It's from the 31st, guys, just a few days ago. Hampton City Schools policies prohibit discrimination against or harassment of students of any basis, including gender identity. All staff members are expected to recognize and respect matters of gender identity, make reasonable accommodations in response to student requests regarding gender identity in accordance with the guidelines set forth below. Now, we know that this has become sort of a viral fire in the youth. People who are already dealing with identity issues. Like, you can look up the literature on this. I'm telling you right now, identity crisis is nearly universal in industrial westernized societies amongst teenagers, because we don't have any coherent ethos to move forward with. We're all discombobulated, and then they get socialized by school, and anything that you might have taught them as your parent, take it or leave it. It goes out the window for many. Some, they stick to it. It's hard to say, but most kids will rebel and reject it because they're going through an identity crisis. Guess what? The people, if you talk to them, who are going transgender are in the midst of an identity crisis. There are other points in your life that you could have one, but that is what's going on. And that's why it's catching on like fire. These kids don't know how they feel, where they fit in. They're going through hormonal changes. I don't know about you guys, but I was really horny in high school, middle school too, even. That's rough. That's rough. Versus now, I'm 40 years old, I can control myself a lot better, right? But then you're going through emotional changes as well, trying to figure out how to socialize as a mini adult. And it's cruel. It's a very cruel environment. And I think it's wholly negative for children. I don't think that big, giant public schools is a good thing at all. Completely reject the idea of it. But it is what it is. It is what we do. And it's a system of indoctrination. And these teachers will do whatever they want and whatever they can to indoctrinate your children. There are no regulations requiring school staff to notify a parent or guardian of a student's request to affirm their gender identity. Therefore, it is to be understood that the division has no affirmative legal duty to inform parents of the student's gender identity choice, acknowledged while a student is involved at the high school. Insane. And This wouldn't be an issue without the identity crisis. So we have from Colin Wright, weekly recap newsletter for subscribers out there covering first grade gender assignments, woke Disney, APA's update. That's the American Psychological Association, which is a totally broken system, totally illegitimate. They do things based on consensus, right? Not science, and based on the wokeness of the day. We all know of the changes in the DMS. It says the APA's update or gender dysphoria defining woman and a lot more. So let's go to that real quick. So first grade assignment on gender ideology. Girl, boy, he, him, neither or both, they, them. Right there it is, first grader. Simple on-screen instruction. Recently, on Twitter, a parent posted a screen cap from their first grader's child's homework assignment. When I tweeted about this, several people told me I missed the target as this lesson does not actually involve gender ideology. That is incorrect. Yeah. Why people are sending their kids to school, it blows my mind. There are 3 obvious red flags contained in this image. The first is the use of gender instead of sex. If this were merely a biological lesson describing how to refer to males and female children, it would use the term sex, male, and female, which are completely absent. Second, the focus on pronouns is a clear giveaway that gender ideology is being taught, especially on lessons about gender. And perhaps the most troubling tell is the neither or both category. Yeah, you think, yeah. Whoever said that, oh, it's not teaching gender ideology is stupid or dishonest. It's pretty simple. That's quite clear there, right? The simplicity of this slide suggests this may represent a child's very first introduction to gender ideology. The parents shared several more screen caps. And this stuff's gross, guys. Aiden Paladin and I did a stream a while back. We talked about this. We read through one of these books that wasn't really that bad of a book, but I showed her some stuff in another book from Blurred Images and stuff. The stuff that is out there is gross. And when you sexualize children, you traumatize them, and they will never have a fully functioning, perfect relationship again unless they get, a lot of therapy or God heals them or something, because it really does wreak havoc on people. Generally, when people are molested, 2 things happen. They become very prudish or they become hypersexual. Neither one of those things is good. Neither one of those things is healthy. Sex is an important part of life for most people. It's how we, perpetuate the species. But, the pedos, they think it's okay to sexualize children, and they don't think it does anything to them as adults. And that's just absolutely absurd. It's totally wrong. It's and it creates a nightmarish thing in our society. It's also something that happens quite regularly in our society, and we don't punish very strictly. I can tell you that firsthand. I was a jailer for 13 years. I was a correctional deputy. Pedos don't get sentences, guys. They get 2-3 years max, generally. Sometimes, on occasion, depending on how egregious it is, they might get 7 or 8. That's a bit better. But we lock up people for far less stuff for far longer, quite often. These are very explicit gender ideologies. The children is asked, upper left, to create a snow person that is an example of your you identify yourself. Emphasis added. Note that the children is not being asked to describe himself in an object sense, but rather how they subjectively identify, which they don't even understand, man. Kids just want to please adults. They are mimickers first and foremost, primarily, until they're about the age of 6 or 7. I mean, when we talk about developmental years, you're talking about the first 4 years of life, and they're trying, these folks, these groomers are trying to lower the age increasingly. They have been for years of things like kindergarten, preschool, where the standards are, oh no, we want to Socialize your kids. Should be a big red flag word for you. Socialize your kids as early as 3 years old. Why it's so important. So they can break your bond with them and so that they can indoctrinate them. That's why. That's why. So there's more here, but you have to sub to this. Of course, I just thought I would bring it up. And lastly, we have from Robert P. George here. It says, when totalitarianism or totalitarians or totalitarian movements in a society acquire sufficient political, economic, or cultural power, they deploy it to eliminate dissent. The first move is to find formal and informal ways to punish criticism of a regime or a movement or its ideology. Next, explicit or veiled threats, sometimes supplemented by positive inducements, are used to get people to go beyond merely keeping their mouths shut to affirm the regime or movement's key ideological points, even if they don't believe in them. This is what most people are doing, right? They're just going along to get along, and they'll re-espouse it. They don't even know what it means. Half the people who do espouse this stuff don't know what they're talking about. The height of the general sense of fear examples are made of people who publicly dissent or refuse to mouth the official pieties. Those who succumb to the pressure and make gestures or statements affirming the movement's ideology begin to experience cognitive dissonance. Now, I don't like the use of that word because no one uses it right. Cognitive dissonance is the feeling you get when you have conflicting ideas at the same time. It is not holding conflicting ideas at the same time. It is the psychophysiological effect it has on your body. So I know nobody uses it right, but it drives me nuts. So that's one thing I'm going to correct here. All right. Not wanting to think of themselves as cowards or liars, those who succumb to the pressure to express conformity to the regime or movement's ideological doctrines gradually talk themselves into believing what they feel compelled to say. They learn to love Big Brother. No. They accept their slavery. That's what happens. The cognitive dissonance is, I think CRT is horrible. I think CRT is great. Oh, these things have to compete in my brain. I feel so awful about how I'm conflicted. One of them dies. That's what the process is of cognitive dissonance. It isn't just holding conflicting ideas. It is the psychophysiological feeling, sensation that happens to your body it'll basically permeate through your mood, right? And your attitude, and you gradually destroy or die to one of those ideas. And that is what happens here every time. And it doesn't even need to take place when they get your children. So keep that in mind, folks. Keep that in mind. This is all about grooming the revolution. Yes, they will molest children. Yes, they will hurt them, but they don't care because they don't believe anyone is innocent. It is a satanic Luciferian cult. All of Marxism is. All of the iterations of neo-Marxism, cultural Marxism, postmodernism, queer studies, gender studies, what is it? Fat studies, whatever else. All of them, wholly destructive. Now, I spent a long time on Friday talking about biblical things, talking about principles, the first principles of this world, and talking about what our spiritual leaders should be and how they should be better and how we should be. And when I talk about these things, I often think about this. You know, I'm a very logical and pragmatic person. I often think about how fantastical it seems. How, that these things sound like a fairy tale to me sometimes. And they do. That is my faith. And I believe it. I believe in my faith deeply. But sometimes I think the rational side of me goes, man, Doesn't that seem like a little kid's tale? Doesn't that, seem fantastical? Admittedly, I understand that, despite believing in it wholeheartedly. But the difference here in my belief system, which you might find fantastical and you might find to be a myth and utter nonsense, is that my belief system requires me to every single day get up and try to be a better man than I was yesterday. That it requires me to go out into the world and to not just tell people things that might be a little platitude, a little nugget of wisdom. No, it requires me to go out in the world and do things that actually create change and difference. It requires me to give to charity. It requires me to discipline myself. It requires me to think of others as higher and more important than myself and to put myself last. It requires me to make a difference in the world that is positive and that is not imposing upon other people. And if that is all fake and I die and I don't meet the Lord, well, I don't care, because I lived a great life trying to be a good man, trying to do good things in the world, trying to help people at every instance that I could. But your ideology of Marxism, your faith in that evil thing will do nothing but bring misery to everyone. That's all I got for today, guys. This has been All Minus One. My name is Bill, and I wish you all well. Catch you guys soon.